When you go to a Mexican restaurant and they bring you the chips, the salsitas, should you or should you not be charged for the chips and salsa?
Well, uh, you can and you cannot. I'm not offended that when they charge. A lot of restaurants will charge before 11 a.m. They will charge you. I so long as they bring them. That's all
No, Efrain's just upset because they charge him because he thinks they're bottomless chips and salsa.
Oh, that's the problem a lot of restaurants have. You know, come to happy hour, cheap margaritas and chips. Well, everybody comes and then they leave before they can have dinner.
Hello, listeners. This is F. Molina, and I got Sonny Garza with me today, and we are joined by a very special person. We are joined by the author of Truly Texas Mexican, Adan Medrano. But it's not only a cookbook, it's recently been made into a movie that is streaming on Amazon, Google, and Apple. And I've seen it, Sonny has seen it, and we've become just absolute fans of it, Mr. Medrano. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mr. Medrano, I've got the first question for you. It came from your documentary. What's with all the cheese?
I love it. They want me to make a T-shirt out of it. Trademark it. Maybe you can help me trademark it. What's with the cheese? Enough with the cheese.
Right.
So the line actually is in the opening sequence of the road movie in the documentary. The documentary is a road movie that weaves through South Texas, San Antonio, and ends up on a boat on the Rio Bravo, Rio Grande. And when we begin the movie, it is a road trip starting in San Antonio, and I walk down the river, San Antonio River, where they're serving Tex-Mex food, and I describe it as by Anglos, for Anglos, and then we go into the origins of our food, the comida casera, and that's when I say on the river, I say, we never ate Tex-Mex at home. We ate comida casera, which my mom and aunts cooked. Right. And I said, we never ate Tex-Mex food. Enough with the cheese. I love cheese, but it doesn't belong on top of everything, in my opinion.
Before you logged on, F and I were talking, and I told him, I really like the documentary because of all of the traditional cooking methods and the traditional ingredients that we know and love and we grew up with, right? But one of the things that I like to do when I cook is I like to take those traditional cooking methods and I like to use other cultures' ingredients and other cultures' cooking methods to kind of fuse them together to create something equally delicious but different. And F says, well, that's Tex-Mex. And I go, no, not Tex-Mex, not Tex-Mex. I'm not talking about cheese and sour cream. You know?
That's a good way to describe it, isn't it? Cheese and everything fried.
Yeah.
We don't eat like that at home. I mean, I don't think you do. I think the movie is about the Texas Mexican food, which is really comida casera of the Mexican American community in South Texas and northeastern Mexico, that region. So I like all of the traditional dishes. That's what my cookbook has. But I'm like you. I think anyone who is a chef, who is a cook, is always inquisitive, right? Always learning, always wanting to try new things, and that's the way food develops. And if you think about it, food doesn't have nationalities. Food has roots. And it travels. You know, what would the Italians do without the Mexican tomato? Right. Tomato went to Italy after the conquest. And what would, fish and chips do without our potato, the Peruvian potato? So food has always traveled. And in the Mexican food, we use Arab ingredients, Spanish ingredients. So it is really always a mixture of the foods that the planet gives us, and they travel through different ways. So I tell the newcomers who don't know Texas Mexican food, you can experiment, but I wish you would first try it the way we cook it, because that way you'll understand the basic flavor profile, which has been built by women over generations and generations, and you've got to taste really deliciousness. Then you can go ahead and do your own thing, but understand the people first.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's funny that you say that, because I was just talking to my brother-in-law about this. My sister and brother-in-law lived in London for the last almost 4 years. And while they lived there, they went to several different countries. They didn't have kids at the time. And so they went to several different countries. They're huge foodies too. And they finally moved back to the Rio Grande Valley for good. And I was sitting down talking to my brother-in-law, and he goes, the food's generally all the same. He's like, look, you've got gyros, you've got naan bread. It's all a tortilla, you know? Everyone has their own version of a tortilla. Everyone has a guisado, you know? Everyone has a guisado, except that Indians put curry in it. We use comino, you know? So everyone's got almost the same version with different spices, with a little different twist. And it's just interesting to see how all that traveled, and the same cooking principles just migrate culture to culture.
I was in northern London at the most northern part for a food show that I was doing, and after I did my show with nopalitos and all, there was a Indian taco stand on the fairgrounds. So I went to see it, and it was roti bread, which resembles our flour tortilla, and they filled it with Indian fillings. And of course, India's food uses a lot of chiles, as does the Asian cuisine, and they got the chiles from Mexico. So they're doing roti, which is their bread with their fillings, but it has chile in it. And I said, you know, this is not Mexican food. This is an Indian roti with the Indian filling. And he said, well, yes, that's true, sir, but it sells so much better if we call it a taco. Because our food, Mexican gastronomy has become so famous. And the food from our region, the southern Texas, northeastern Mexico, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, Texas, all this is one regional cohesive cuisine. If you go to Brownsville, I mean, these are some of the families, they'll be cooking the same style that we cook in Brownsville and McAllen. And the reason is because we're all related. Right. We're the same family. It's just that, you know, the border crossed us, and, you know, we were separated. But if you look at the real history, the food is ours. And although much of it resembles others, there are things that are specific to every region that other regions don't have.
Mr. Medrano, what made you want to do this movie? Because usually when I get onto Amazon or Netflix or Google, I start flipping through stuff, and I don't see anything on the Rio Grande Valley or Tex-Mex or anything involving this culture. So for you to come out, what made you say, you know what, I could be doing all these other things, but I'm going to focus on telling this story?
It's my story. It's my mother's story, my grandmother's story, my grandfather's story. And it's a story that has not been told. And it has not been told by design. The fact that we have trouble teaching the history of Mexican Americans and the history of the indigenous peoples of Texas in grade school and high school is a sign that we were erased and continue to be erased, because our story is a story that puts the worldview of people in power, it puts their worldview in crisis. And I have lived with, as most Mexican Americans in Texas have lived with discrimination, facing ridicule and put down in many sectors. And our food is too beautiful. Our artists and our culinarians are too strong and creative artists to be untold. We need to share this with the whole world, because if you look at the origin of chiles, they're from this region, Tamaulipas, Nuevo León. If you look at the origin of the calabacita, it's from this region, Coahuila, Chihuahua. and I could go on and on. So our cuisine has a long, rich history that dates back to 15,000 years ago when the first original people stepped on Texas soil. Our, if you look at our faces, if you look at our stories, we are the descendants of the original indigenous peoples, Coahuiltecos, Carancahuas, all of these names, those are our forebears. And the worldview that we have been taught in school is that we came from south of the river. That's the worldview. And we are first generation, second generation on this land. And that's false. The worldview says that Mexican food, Texas Mexican food, is food from south of the border, and it came north of the border, and the Anglo-Americans who were here, the cowboys, gave it a twist to make it more American, more Anglo, and that's the food of this region. It's like a Mexican food, but it came over and we made it delicious in our own way as Anglo people, Anglo-Texan people, Spanish as well. And that's the worldview. Our food, when you understand it, puts that worldview in crisis. Because our food did not come from south of the border. Our food was here, in Brownsville, in McAllen, in San Antonio, long before the country was Mexico, long before even the U.S. was the U.S. From those first people, if you look at the we do roasting, we do chiles, we do aguacates, all of this pre-existed Texas. So the food was already here. We just developed it, and that's what I mean by putting the worldview in crisis. And I wanted to make the film because our story needs to be told. We've been in the shadows of Tex-Mex. You call our food Tex-Mex, I don't. I call it Texas Mexican comida casera, because if you take comida casera, let's say carne guisada, and you go to a Tex-Mex restaurant, an Anglo Tex-Mex restaurant here in Houston or in San Antonio, or in places north, Dallas, they will put cheese on top
on your carne guisada.
Cheese again.
Yeah, they will put sour cream and cheese on your and guacamole on your carne guisada for sure.
I mean, my mother would slap you. ¿Qué estás haciendo? ¿Qué le estás poniendo? You know, that is not our food. You know, and as you see in the film, we start the film with the story of the chili queens. You know, our food was taken away and made popular by Anglo restaurateurs and by Anglo writers who then called it Tex-Mex.
That was one part in your film that had my blood just boiling. It was like they kind of took our culture away from us, right? And kind of commercialized it.
They did two things when they commercialized it. Of course, we commercialized it. The chili queens in downtown San Antonio, they were the original chefs, and they were cooking carne guisada, arroz con pollo. They were cooking all of these things, which is our food, and they were entrepreneurs, and they were commercializing it. But they were cooking our food and telling our stories. So when Tex-Mex begins, they copy the women, but they start doing all of these things, which is not the original flavor profile. And the main thing was, if you read the advertisement from the time, if you read the advertisement, and we show this in our film, el chile de nuez, el chile, de nuez, nuez quemada, chile quemada, the chile quemada candy. We show an advertisement that says Mexican pecan candy made by white people only.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's our history. Our food is good, but we don't want Mexicans around us.
And Mr. Medrano, my kids, my wife and I both cook a lot. And my kids love to cook because of it. And whenever we're watching some kind of food show on TV, they always sit down and watch with us. And my son, who's 11, he sat down to watch your documentary with me. And he just thought it was the coolest thing because it's all the food. His grandma makes carne guisada, right? And to him, it's the best thing in the world. It's wow. Holy crap, it's carne guisada night. Grandma's making carne guisada, Dad, And there's a little riff in the family because my mother-in-law is from Raymondville, Texas. And over there, they used to serve carne guisada with mashed potatoes and corn. And I told her, hey, I just watched Mr. Medrano's documentary, and you know what was the most interesting is that nobody served carne guisada with mashed potatoes and corn in the entire documentary.
Oh,
we it's a little joke that we have because my mom's always done it with rice and beans, right?
yes,
Frijoles a
yes.
la charra con arroz, and and so that's a little joke we have. But my son was watching the show with me, and he saw that menu item, and he said, "Wait, why does that say, you know, made by whites only?" And I said, "Because they didn't want Mexican people to make their food." He goes, "Who didn't want Mexican people to make their food?" And I said, the people who were buying it, son. And he goes, "When was this?" And I go, "It was a long time ago. You know, it was a long time ago."
No,
Uh,
that is 1915.
1915.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so he that hooked him, and we watched the whole show. And then the other big talking point was the cabeza de vaca that you guys made
Oh,
in the pozo. And so, you know, at this point, my daughter's coming to the room. You have her attention now. She's 9. She loves to cook with me, and she's sitting down. She goes, "What are they doing, Dad?" And I go, "They're making a cabeza de vaca, mija." "What's that?" It's a cow's head. They're gonna put it in the ground." "And what do you mean they're gonna put it in the ground?" "Well, just watch. They're gonna put it in the ground." "Well, like, why are they putting it in the hole?" And I go, "Because that's a barbecue pit." Like, "That's not a barbecue pit." And I go, "That was the original barbecue pit."
great. Yes,
That's
yes.
how barbecue pits got their names.
A pit.
A pit, right?
That's great. It's so uh, affirming to me to hear that your children are reacting to the film this way. It's really affirming to me, and I will tell our team, our production team. We spent 3 years making this, and the people that we interviewed, you can tell they know what they're talking about, but it comes from the heart. This is their traditions. Many people still make cabeza de pozo. So to know that young people, can have a chance to see their true history is wonderful. That's great. That's the way we made the film.
Well,
Thank you.
Mr. Medrano, in all honesty, I mean, your film hits the heartstrings hard because you're talking about all of our abuelitas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking when you're talking about flour tortillas, I think of my mother's mom, you know, and how amazing her flour tortillas were. That the food, it's the smells, the cooking, the tastes that reconnects us with people who are no longer with us that we love very much. And so when I watched your film, that's what it reminded me of. And it's not just on us, you know, it also it's in the young people too, because my kids, they recognized how important what you were doing is. Basically, they know at this age that the foods that they love aren't that popular, and someone's out there showing how good they are and how popular it is, and it's kind of reaffirming everything that they know and believe about Mexican food and Mexican cuisine.
It's so great to hear. Thank you for saying that. That's absolutely right.
And I mean, you're telling a story that everyone with our culture can relate to. It's our grandmother's story. It's their great grandmother's story. What type of recognition, or what have you heard from film critics or from other people that aren't from Texas that have seen the film? What are they saying about it?
Thank you for asking that. My surprise at the reception of the film has just floored me. The film was released in March of this year, and we submitted it to festivals across the world. We were awarded Best Documentary at the New York Independent Cinema Awards, and in London, these festivals receive hundreds and hundreds of submissions from film artists across the globe, and they have to select, and they showcase some of them. So to be an official selection at a film festival is a really big deal. Most often you get rejected but our film, was official selection at Mallorca, San Sebastian Film Festival, Spain, London, the 25th anniversary of the Red Nation Film Festival. We had an official submission, and we were nominated for Best Documentary. And just 3 weeks ago, I was in Fredericksburg We submitted to Fredericksburg. It's called the Hill Country Film Festival. It's a German.
Germantown.
Oh, Fredericksburg. Yeah, we know Fredericksburg.
We're familiar.
We're familiar with Fredericksburg.
I've drank a lot of wine there, but yeah, okay.
Okay, it's not like submitting it to the San Antonio Cine Festival, where we got a huge adulation. It was sold out, by the way. But we went there. I said, I want to see this movie told, our story told there, with that non-Mexican American community. It's celebrating its roots as a German town.
And just so that the viewers know, to paint a backstory, usually if you travel through Fredericksburg, you'll see a few Confederate flags. A few, that they're not as many as there used to be, but there's still a few. So for you to want to tell and show the story there, what happened?
Yes, that was a big dare for me. I mean, and as I drove in that day, I was seeing these re-elect Trump signs and then Confederate flags. And I thought, geez, our poor movie. So they screened it. It got a really good screening position, and they loved it.
Wow.
They loved it. We had a question and answer session with the producer's name is Virginia Diaz. She is from Houston, but she was born and grew up in San Antonio, South Side. She and I went there and we had these questions. They loved it. One of them said that they had never seen a documentary like this that really shook you and made you realize that stories were hidden, and how the beauty of Texas that she knew was very superficial. So we had a lot of that. And then at the end of the festival, where they were giving away all the prizes. Best documentary, we didn't get it. But the two top prizes are best of the festival is number one, and the second is audience choice. There were 65 films shown at the festival, and we won. We got the audience choice award.
You won that in Fredericksburg? Whoa!
In Fredericksburg.
Whoa.
And that's a really big deal. In Fredericksburg, of course, a lot of people were coming in from Austin as well, which is just a few hours away. But I was really floored because that's the second biggest award they give, and everybody wants that because that's the real sign that you hit a chord with the audience, because they vote. They actually vote. So he said we got a lot of high ratings. So I was very glad about that. We are licensed by universities. I urge you, if you're a university professor and you're working at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, to ask your librarian to contact me and get a license. UTSA, University of Houston downtown, University of Toronto. They've licensed the film to be shown for educational purposes on their campuses. And I think that's wonderful because the young people will know comida casera of the Mexican American people of South Texas, Rio Grande Valley, Brownsville. This is world-class cuisine that's making a big impact with chefs and restaurants all over the globe.
What's next?
What's next?
What's your next project? How do you follow this thing up?
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that. It's a hard act to follow. I keep getting on Instagram and others these heartfelt. I invite if you're watching me, look for me on Instagram. Adan M Medrano is my. So you see the name there, Adan Medrano. You just put an M in between those two and no spaces, and that's me. I get these wonderful letters from people in California who are from the Valley, who say how deeply they have been moved by this. So it'll be hard to replicate this, but we have it. It's a 6-part television series, and it builds on the success of this one. And it's called Green Texas Mexican, the plant foods of the Texas borderland. So you have us, so we're going into the history and how to prepare nopalitos, how we prepare calabacita, how we prepare the various potatoes and squash and beans and corn in ways that are very sophisticated and that have been part of our tradition for so many years. So there's six episodes. One of them is conjunto music and food. So we will be in the Valley shooting lots of conjunto and talking about the food that they prepare that is plant-based. Because the cows arrived with the Spaniards. You know, our original meals did not have cows. Those are recent, nor pork. Those are recent. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to be farm workers in the valley, and the topic is labor and food on the border. And then, you know, they pick all this food, the lettuce and the repollo and all of these wonderful things, citrus. So that's what we're doing next. We're pitching it now. We're looking for sponsors. Anyone on here who is interested in sponsoring this? So it'll be distributed internationally the way this one is. But the nice thing is that our movie has been successful locally. All of the TV stations in Texas watched it. When we aired it in Houston, we had a higher rating than that baseball series by Ken Burns. We rated higher. We had 20,000 viewers, and theirs was lower for PBS. So we're there. We're going to tell the story of the plant-based foods of our community, and there's lots of them.
And
so you have a choice. You can have a choice.
And when you tell a story, Mr. Medrano, you don't just tell it. You have your viewer smell it, see it, hear it. You are a great storyteller. Really, I mean, you are the star of that documentary. Just the way you told it, and the compassion that you have. You really feel the culture. I mean, you lived it, and we're seeing our culture through you on the big screen, which is so cool.
Yeah. I wanted it to be a feature film documentary. Unfortunately, with COVID, we can't be in a theater, but it has been shown on the big screen twice. The Museum of Fine Arts in Houston will show it. The Angelica Theater in Dallas will show it. But with this surge, we don't know how that's going to turn out. I very much appreciate you saying that you're close and you can enjoy the aroma of the food. It's a different type of storytelling. As Chicanos, as Mexican Americans, Latinx, Latinos, Latinas, we are looked at, but we never get our voice to tell our own story the way we want to tell it. And Virginia Diaz, the producer, became a strong force. I knew we needed a producer who understood this food, and Virginia Diaz is a very strong filmmaker with a long history of successful movies. She was the co-location manager for the feature film Selena, if you remember that feature film. She did that film. So, and then we flew in the cinematographer from Uruguay, Latin America, and we had just the four of us going in. And we said, if we have lights and all this, it's just going to destroy the atmosphere. We have one small camera, and then the microphones, and that was it. It was just us and that. So that's why we could get really close. We don't want you to look at the Mexican-American food and people. We want you to be with us in the film. And that's what we were trying to accomplish.
Thank you very much. Medrano. And I have to say, I was a little jealous. You had a Fremont rancher on your documentary, and I said, man, if I ever get the shot, I'd love to take Mr. Medrano to my family's ranch, and we can do a cabrito. We can do so my thing is wild game. I like to prepare wild game in different ways. So, you know, we can catch fish off the coast and do a smoked trout taco. We can do cabritos. We can do it all. So if you ever down here, I'd love to have you over.
Be careful, because I want to say yes to that. I'd love to do
it.
Have you ever tried the South Texas Nilgai antelope?
I haven't tried it. I lived with a Nilgai. I lived for 1 year in Sarita.
Okay.
And I was living in that big house, you know, the Sarita, that big house.
Yeah.
And so I was there for a year and a month or so, and I would take long walks down so I saw the Nilgai there.
They're delicious.
Are they?
Oh, they're delicious. It's way better than venison. It's very similar to beef, just a lot leaner.
I've been very fortunate that people have listened because they tasted our Texas Mexican food, and they say Tex-Mex, and I say it's not Tex-Mex. Don't call it that. It's Texas Mexican, or it's comida casera, you know, but it's not Tex-Mex. You're not going to get all this cheese. It's got all these flavors. So I went to Moscow to represent the U.S. at the U.S. Embassy, for their big celebration. I cooked tacos de carne asada. In November, I'm at the Culinary Institute of America Worlds of Flavor Conference. They've had it, this is their 23rd anniversary, and it's their world conference where chefs from all over the world come, and it's a conference on cuisines, the changing cuisines and restaurants. Part of what you were talking about, that food changes, you know.
Right.
And so I'm one of the presenting chefs. I was invited, and I'm going to cook a variety of dishes, nopalitos, but for the closing one, I'm going to do this trout that you mentioned, smoked trout.
Yep.
So, you know, but I put on the smoked trout, I put it's a mayonesa de chipotle y hierba anís.
Okay.
It's really something because it sort of flies off. So it's the smoked trout, which is one of our indigenous foods, and you smoke it beautifully. I used pecan this time.
Mm-hmm.
But the chipotle and hierba anís, a lot of people don't use hierba anís. It comes from the south. It's a wonderful, it's like tarragon. It's a beautiful, so I'm going to cook that. So
that's great.
I may bring some, or we may make some when I go there.
Let's do it. Just let me know.
Your habanero and my mayonesa de chipotle con. You will notice that if like Maria's restaurant in McAllen, in fact, most restaurants in the Rio Grande Valley do not call themselves Tex-Mex. They call them, they're Mexican restaurants.
No.
Tex-Mex comes from a totally different tradition by Anglos, for Anglos, and they've developed this story that we are Tex-Mex because they're the ones who had access to the writing of the publications and the magazines. And but that's changing, and more people are recognizing the beauty of our food. And I think everyone ends up being grateful and happy. I mean, it's about beautiful food. The more you cook and share beautiful food, the more beautiful the world becomes. And that's the bottom line.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Medrano, and sharing your story with us and your input. And we're huge fans. And keep doing what you're doing, and keep telling these stories that no one else is telling, please.
Come visit us, please. Yeah, we have those.
Remember the molcajete.